should come up. There we go. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Okay, welcome everybody to January's People Policy and Development Committee. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence.
Only apologies from Dave Howes, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Alison. A second item on the agenda is disclosures of personal or prejudicial interests. Okay, third is the minutes of the last meeting. Anybody happy to move those?
I'll move those through, Chairman, unless anybody's got any changes they want made.
Anybody want changes made? No. Okay, so Paxton's voted to move them. Can somebody second that?
Yes.
There you go. Okay, Steve, thank you. Okay, and then we're on to the main item on the agenda then, which is young carers, ensuring the well-being of young carers in the context of COVID. So I'll just give a brief update of where we are. So we held a workshop with several members of the committee and Egija, whose second name escapes me, but she's the service coordinator for the Young Carers Service for Swansea, which is run via the YMCA. So we had a very informative workshop with her explaining to us everything that happens in Swansea, all the different types of work that they do, and how they could. Then we had a brief discussion at the end of that about how we can support, how they can support our work really, and some of the points that she was making, some really important points about how COVID has impacted on young carers' duties. I think she gave a statistic of up to 30 hours extra a week that young carers are having to take on care and responsibilities for their loved ones, be their peers or parents, in that time. But she also made a really important point about the holistic needs of young carers as well, in terms of both accessing devices to stay in touch with friends, and education and things like that. So it was a very, very informative workshop. I think she's obviously very passionate about her job, which is great from our perspective as councillors to know that the Young Carers Service in Swansea is in such good hands. And we discussed there how we could move this forward. I don't know if anybody else who was on the workshop wants to come in and say anything at this point, or if anybody who wasn't on the workshop would like to ask some questions at this point. Mark Child, do you want to come in?
Yeah, briefly, I echo your delight at her enthusiasm for her job, her passion for her job. It was clearly evident, and she could still be talking now about it if we'd allowed the meeting to go on, I feel, which was good. She clearly knew her stuff. I would welcome her continued, consultation with her now and again as we progress this. I think it clearly is via her that we need to talk to young carers if we do talk to them. I think it's important that we don't impose ourselves on them, that if they want to join in with us, they're invited to join in with us rather than us turning up at something that they've already got, because it's because they are, if we ask them what they want and we're unable to provide it becomes a difficult situation. So I think with her or one of her colleagues there as well would be needed. There were lots of stuff about mental health that perhaps we don't necessarily pick up enough. There was lots of stuff about, like you said, about their home, home environment, rather than just their ability to care and helping them with that caring, which is important. And I think, although COVID has thrown things up, one of the points raised during the discussions there was that we need to be able to take from this stuff that goes forward for after COVID, hopefully, is no longer a serious issue that we're dealing with. But I mean, I was well impressed with her.
Thanks, Mark. I've got Mike White and then Paxton. Mike?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, no, as I say, very passionate, very committed lady to the job that she does. Excellent. I think, we're all governors of schools. I think we should be promoting the services that she's given to these young people. by raising it in our schools with our head teachers to see what additional support that we can give as well as schools. And what I would like to do, if we could, if possible, Chair, when hopefully get back to some normality, because we've got a cluster schools within areas and comprehensive schools, even if we had a sort of ask the heads to have a joint meeting so they could share their ideas and support in helping the young carers, because as councillors as well, we could certainly help by signposting them to other hubs within the communities that could support the young carers and the YMCA.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Well said. I think some really good important points in there. Paxton and then Leslie.
Hi, Chairman. Obviously, it was a very good presentation, and that's obviously been said already. The girl obviously knows exactly what she's talking about and has got it at her fingertips. But the figure that did surprise me that came out of that was the fact that there are 3 carers in every class in every school. And that indicates the size of the problem. What I would be interested to know from a council point of view is how many of those we know about now, or at this time rather now, and how are we going to find out the rest of them and how we get to them as much as anything else, because you want to be helping everybody, not just a few who are perhaps the ones who are a bit more capable of making themselves known, I think is the best way of putting it. But I think it is a problem that we need to be addressing, and I don't know whether Simon's got any answers to that in terms of how we identify them, whether we're doing the necessary carer assessments at the time when we're doing the assessments for need in the first place for the person who needs the care. So those are questions I think we need to be asking internally to get those answers first of all, and then we can go from there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. It's again really important points, Paxton. I think we'll come on to talk to some about that, and then we talk about the strategy in a second. But I'll bring Leslie in at this point. Leslie.
Thank you. Sort of partly following on from some of the general comments. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make the meeting, and it's very, very gratifying to know that Ajia is so enthusiastic and committed. I'm very pleased about that. I was just wondering if she did have suggestions specifically for this committee as to what we can be doing to help support young carers. I mean, Mike White has mentioned a few practical points as councillors, but I was thinking more of the sort of, as you say, strategy that this committee could be doing. Thanks.
Thanks, Les. I'll hold on to that question for a little bit, if that's okay, and come back to it when we come to discuss briefly about the strategy. Bring Simon in. Simon, and then Jan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I just wanted to respond to what Paxton was saying, really, and my reflection on what was an excellent presentation was that there is also a statutory element to our, obligations to young carers, isn't there? Which, in terms of our needing to offer a carer's assessment, and also, an active offer generally, isn't it? Really. So that there is anything when we look at good practice and the range of services and things, it all sounds very impressive, but at the end of the day it has to be grounded in what we as a council have to do from a statutory point of view. But also there is also I think alongside that we learn from the work with that is a commissioning exercise going on at the moment, isn't there, with where I think the Swansea YMCA have been invited to tender for all the work, and I think that's still ongoing. So there was a sort of an element of impasse, and a part of the commissioning process from a council point of view is to understand the population and needs, isn't it, within that? So presumably that work's been done, and that's part of how we work on a statutory basis as well, isn't it? Understanding local population needs and how we can meet their those going forward. So I think there's also, I think Kerry will mention the work on the strategy that's going on as well. So there's a number of elements to it, really. It's not just about what the good work that the Swansea YMCA are doing on our behalf, really.
Yeah, thank you, Simon. There's some really really important points in there, both about the strategy and about the recommission and how that can, the work that should have already been done around young carers to tie into with what we're trying to achieve. We'll come back to that in a second. Jan Curtis.
Yeah, some of my concerns have been said already, Kerry, but my biggest concern would be is how many of young carers are we not knowing about? Because some young carers don't even recognise themselves as being carers. So are we bringing them on board as well? Would be my concern, is that we're not missing these youngsters that also need our help and care.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thanks, Jan. I think this similar to what Paxton was saying.
Yeah.
Yvonne?
Thanks, Chair. Following on what Jan was just saying, a lot of them don't recognise themselves or don't see themselves as carers. But I think although we need to help and support, we don't want to label, especially if the person doesn't want to label, because, you know, for some of us or for some young people, looking after their siblings is just natural, you know. So it's about being sensitive to how we offer the support that we're offering. That's it, Chair.
Yeah,
Thanks.
I think that's a really important point, Yvonne. I think that's something that Gavin was talking about in the last committee meeting, where he was saying, you know, that there's not to approach this group as a homogenous group, really, that there's a range of young carers with a range of different needs, aren't there, you know? And Gia was making a good point today about the disappearance of the young carers grant. So, and whether there's a future for, you know, re-looking at that. But again, that's going to be for young carers who've got specific needs, but it might not be applicable to everybody. So I think those are really all very important points that everybody's made today, really. So I've written them all down. That's how important they all were. So anyway, I think coming back to the strategy, I was able to have an ad hoc meeting with Gavin in between the workshop and the committee today, to discuss around, you know, some of the conversations we'd had in the workshop, which are mirrored in what we've just discussed, and about the committee. Leslie's question about what can the committee do to support young carers. I mean, I think going back to what Mark and Yvonne have said as well, I think we need to very much have a dialogue with young carers so that we're getting their ideas on that. But equally, from a strategic perspective, I think Yvonne made a really good point at the end of the workshop about that this isn't just about COVID, this is about young carers all the time, for want of a better description. And obviously the strategy has been developed in Swansea as we speak. So I had a quick chat with Gavin about the committee overseeing the development of that strategy in the next couple of months, which he was very open to and receptive to, and something I discussed with him and Simon before anyway. But so the timeline on their strategy is that they want to produce it by April, which ties in with our time frame, really. So our time frame on this topic is to March, at the end of March. So we discussed that briefly. So I think the next step, really, if you've all got ideas for how we move this forward, this is your opportunity to say now. So what I'm looking to do is for the next month to make contact with the GIA around how we access young people around the COVID element of this work, but then that would feed into the bigger piece of work around the strategy. So open the suggestions now, open the floor up for how we can move this forward. Some really important points that people have made today around how we go about doing that. Gavin has also said that he's prepared to come either to the committee next month or a workshop looking at where they are with the strategy thus far. And kind of the scope of the strategy and what the different elements to it. So that's what he suggested. Over to you guys, really, in terms of your comments on that, what you think about that. Would anybody like to come in at this point? Mark, and then Les. You're on mute, Mark.
Okay, sorry. I think one of the things we need to make sure in the strategy is that we've got a means of making sure that the profile of the existence of support for young carers is high, so that young people who have a caring responsibility, or other people that identify young carers who have a caring responsibility, are aware of that there is support, so that there are as few barriers as possible for them coming forward. And I understand what Yvonne is saying, and people don't want labels and that sort of thing. But we don't want any barriers either, so that they come and see what level of support there is available to them and what they can and can't do, and they can almost pick and choose, or the length and what involvement they have, what support they get, so that it's easier for them to pick up that support, whether that's advertised through schools and social media, or any other environment where the young people might gather. I think that's important. I think she mentioned something about one of the GP practices, GP clusters rather, around Swansea being heavily involved. I would have thought one of the PSB's goals is for children to have the best start in life, I believe. Clearly, this group of children needs some extra assistance to have the best start in life, and one element of that would be whatever is happening in the Cwmtawi cluster to be happening in the other clusters as well, or the amount of effort reflected in the other clusters as well, perhaps. So that we are trying to give these children the best start in life. The grant, is there finance available to provide a grant? What would be the criteria around that grant, and how would it be, what are we trying to achieve with it? So I think we need to think about that. But the other thing she did say was the various support that is out there, how do we make sure it's not age limited? If a child is 10 and got caring responsibilities, or 16 and got caring responsibilities, don't they deserve the same amount of support? So what can we do to erase those age barriers that seem to be in there as well? Yeah, I'll do for now.
Thanks, Mark. Okay. Les.
Thanks, Kerry. I think some of the things that Mark was saying, how we get the message across, I think one of the most important things here, as with really everything the council does, is the right kind of communication. And Yvonne came out with a very good point that somebody who's a carer, not just young carers, but old adult carers, might not see themselves as such. And I'm not saying I've got any answers here, but I think we've got to be quite canny about how we get the message across. We've got help here if you want it, but also how to get the message that they have got the ability and the right to turn around and say, this is what we want. And I don't think that's easy. I think that's quite a difficult dynamic, because, as you say, you don't want to make them feel that they're being labelled or put in a little box, and that's all they are, young carer, because they're not, they're a young person. But on the other hand, you want to make sure that they know that there's help available. And as somebody said earlier, the help that one of them might have won't be the same as the help as another one might need and have. And again, it's a case of getting the communication right so that you get all those messages across. And as I say, I'm just throwing that up. I haven't got any brilliant ideas as how to solve that, but I think that's important. Thanks.
Thanks, Les. Mike?
Yes, thank you, Chair. What I'd be interested in really is to try and find out what support are they receiving from their schools, and also is there good practice out there which we can perhaps we can actually roll out I think that's important because, you know, that's the way that we're going to learn, isn't it? If people share good practice and they know this, and, you know, that they are sort of really, really strong sort of measures that they can look at to get the support as well. But I'd be interested to find out exactly what support are they actually receiving from their own individual schools.
Okay, thanks, Mike. I think what might be useful, I can't see any other hands at this point, or Paxton, come here, Paxton.
Just a minute, if I may come in, because I think what Mark has said is really important in looking forward is how we do it, right? Now, Simon's already mentioned the fact that we should have mechanisms in place to identify these children through through the social services element of it. But we need to ensure that that base is there, and we are getting that. And those are questions I think we need to be asking of officers. So then the proposals that were coming from Mark and everybody else can then be built on that, I think. And we'll have some idea of the resource requirement then in that respect. If we can be satisfied, we know what the numbers that we're talking about at the end of the day, and that people are getting the service that they've identified. People are being identified to make sure that they are available, the service is available to them. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Paxton. Steve? You're on mute, Steve. You're on mute.
Clicked off 3 times again. I sit on the education scrutiny panel as well as this, and I've raised there that we may not understand who are carers within the school, because at the moment they are being educated at home and out of the system, and even when schools are reopened, they're still educated at home and using COVID as an excuse. I think what we've got to link in, and as part of the plan, I think, is being in close association with the education to ensure that we are linked and going in the right direction. There are definitely going to be young carers who are not identified as young carers and perhaps don't want to be, as we've already said. But there may also be a sinister sort of look at this, is that they are being, it's a safeguarding issue as well. So I think we have to be aware of both issues.
Yeah, thanks, Steve, and to Mike for raising the importance of education. I know that the education PDC is looking, one of the things they're looking at, I was discussing with Robert Smith last week, was about vulnerable learners, and obviously young carers would certainly fall into that category. So obviously we've been discussing just so that we avoid duplication. So I'll pick that up myself with Robert after this meeting and see what if we can dovetail our work with their work as well and feed that into the strategy. I was thinking, as we were all talking, I think it might be useful, given the comments that Simon had made as well about the recommissioning process and what they would have done in terms of population needs analysis. But then it may well be that the department has done a lot of this legwork already in their planning around the strategy. So I think it would be good for us perhaps to either have a workshop or just the committee, that Gavin can come back to us and speak to us specifically about where they are with the strategy, what their scope is like around that strategy, what they're hoping to include in it, and who they're going to consult with and when and how. Because I think a lot of the questions that came up then might be clarified by that, or certainly refined by that. So if you're all in agreement, I think perhaps that's the way to move this forward for next month, is to get, and as Gavin has been so receptive to us anyway, it's, you know, it'll be something that should be easy to organise. So if you're happy with that, I'll go and do that, and I'll speak to Agia as well. Agia mentioned at the end about us potentially having young carers joining us in a teams meeting like this if they want to, obviously. And that would be very easy to organise. And I think Mark Child is right that she's going to be key in terms of our consultation with young carers. Les?
I just wondered, from what you just said, is there a kind of a recognised group that they could send, say, representatives of their group to this meeting? Yeah,
well, obviously we one of the things that Igia was discussing was around developing, I think she called it a young carers board in the workshop, and I think that's very much something that can, could possibly be part of a strategy, or could be an outcome from our work as well. Really, that there's a development of a young carers board, and that we can maybe find some resource for that. At the minute, Les, it sounds like, I'd have to double check with the gear. It sounds like that isn't in place currently, but it's more like the service does because the service is seeing young people or in contact with young people. They're doing consultation as and when through their day-to-day work. Do you want to come back in on that?
I was just going to say that I think that could be the way of identifying a lot more that don't normally come forward. And also, going back to my rather long-winded theme on communication, I think it's a better way of doing it, because again, it avoids this labelling. It's just that those young people, if they're representing others, they've probably got a far better chance of linking up with other people that are hidden from view, and comes back to Paxton's point about knowing the extent of the issue, and will probably reveal a lot more than we don't know about, who we don't know about, sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Paxton?
Just a quickie. Are we in a situation as a committee to co-opt members of the public or experts? I wasn't sure the constitutional. I know we can in terms of scrutiny, but I wasn't sure if we could in terms of this.
I'm not sure if Alison wants to comment, but I think that we are.
Yes, yeah, you can co-opt, but obviously they wouldn't be voting members. But if you've got somebody that has got experience that you want to join, yeah, they can do.
Yeah. Well, it might be sensible to consider that then, because obviously, listening to the young lady today, it's easier to say that than say her name, I must admit, because I wasn't sure. She might be a sensible person to co-opt if she's prepared to do it.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think she would be prepared to do it. Because I think we discussed it briefly in the meeting that we had last week. But I think some of that will depend on when this commissioning process comes to an end as well. So, but when I haven't spoken to Gavin today, apparently that has finished. They're in a position. Obviously, he didn't tell me what the outcome is, and that they're not announcing it yet. But he says they're in a position to announce it very soon.
So we're not likely to be interfering with a legal situation, then, are we?
I think it wasn't so much that, Paxton. I think it was as if for instance, a different provider was to win that tender. Right. It may be insensitive to be asking the gear to come on board at that point. So I think,
okay. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I think we'll know pretty quickly though in the next week or so, from what Gavin was saying, what the outcome is of that, and hopefully, from our point of view anyway, we'll be able to suggest that to her gear, and hopefully she'll accept. Because I take on board exactly what you're saying. Okay, I can't see any other hands, so I'll go forward and speak to Gavin then around the strategy, and I'll speak to Iggy similarly around the consultation around the COVID part of the work. And then I'll let you all know via email what the situation will be for next month. If there's nothing else, then I'll move on to the last item on the agenda, which is the work plan. Mark, do you want to come in? Sorry.
Sorry, Clive. If there are any drafts or any nearly finished bits of the strategy, whatever, anything that or evidence they've taken that can be circulated to inform us before we sit down and meet again, I'd welcome a copy of it.
Yeah, certainly, Mark. I'll do that. No problem at all. Okay, so the final item on the agenda is item 5, which is the work plan. At the minute, there's only one item on that work plan, which is what we've been talking about today. I think for next month, we'll need to start looking at what the item will be as we move into April. So we can bring that forward to the next month and have a look at that. We had some suggestive topics at the start of the year, which were put on the back burner, as it were, because of the impact on social care of COVID. We might be in a position to move those agenda items forward. But I'll open that up to the committee. We can discuss that next week if you're all in agreement with that. Next month, sorry, if you're all in agreement with that. Okay. If nobody's got anything else to add, thanks very much for your attendance and for the workshop today. It was great. It was a really interesting discussion, and it's nice to see everybody being so passionate about our vulnerable young people in Swansea. So thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thanks, Kerry. Cheers. Bye.
Very-
Ta-ra.
Cheers, Kerry. Ta-ra all.
Yeah.